Russia and Belarus have started joint military exercises. Is there a threat to the Ukrainian border? And is it true that Trump is finally ready to increase pressure on Moscow? And the horrific double murder that shocked all of Ukraine this week. It's 8 o'clock on the clock. In the United Marathon, we begin the summary edition of TSN. The 1+1 channel is with you live today. Next, the most important news on the 1,297th day of the full-scale war. Presidents, prime ministers, ministers, Trump's special envoy, and even a prince. This is an international diplomatic landing party which these days at least allows Kiev residents to sleep at night. President Zelensky even stated that the presence of Trump's special envoy in Ukraine would encourage Russia to cease fire and that he could even grant General Kellogg citizenship. Throughout this TCH broadcast, we will talk about a day of statements, important meetings and promises about support for achieving a just peace and Ukraine's future prosperity. But first to the news from the frontline regions where, unfortunately, enemy shelling does not cease for even a single day. Sumy community. Mourning in the Sumy community. There, the occupiers struck the village of Betitsia with 3 missiles. 2 people were killed, 5 were wounded. And in Sumy, drones set fire to the industrial zone. Because of repeated strikes, firefighters could not immediately begin rescue operations. Later, the body of a deceased security guard was found under the rubble. A 19-year-old passenger of a civilian car, which was attacked by a drone, was also injured. A car also became a target for enemy drones in Spodobivka, Kharkiv region. 3 local residents required medical assistance, and 3 more people were injured in the Barvinkivska community. In Borova, shelling destroyed a private house and damaged an apartment building. 1 woman suffered an acute stress reaction, and 2 elderly people may still be trapped under the rubble. 2 people were killed by the Russians in Donetsk region, in Kalaniki and Kostiantynivka, and 1 more was wounded. Over the past day, the enemy shelled the region 30 times. There is significant destruction there. A woman was killed in Dnipropetrovsk region. 3 men were injured, including a truck driver. The occupiers deliberately struck a car marked Bread with an FPV drone, and as a result of artillery shelling, houses and apartment buildings were destroyed. The occupiers launched 3 guided aerial bombs at a small village in Zaporizhzhia region. The Russians bombarded Semenivka with cabs. A 65-year-old man was killed. In total, the occupiers carried out more than 400 strikes across the region. 2 men with blast injuries were hospitalized in Kherson after a drone attack. The war criminals also shelled the city with artillery. An elderly resident was rescued from under the rubble of the house. His home was destroyed by fire. Drone attacks are increasing and enemy artillery is operating even more intensively. Chernihiv region, which borders Russia, is suffering from Russian shelling. Over the past day, 4 districts came under attack. Most of the attacks in the region are carried out by Shahed and FPV drones. How do people live under constant shelling on the border with the enemy? Watch the report by TSN correspondent Valentina Dobrota. She has just returned from Semenivka. It's only 10 kilometers from the Russian border.
It was a direct hit to the bedroom, closer to midnight, when people were definitely already in bed. Treachery. So typical of the Russians.
The lights went out, everything went dark, they shut off the gas, and then they started working here. And the drones just kept coming, non-stop.
Alexander Yevanovich recalls that right after the explosion, he rushed to his neighbor's house.
If there had been a fire, they would have burned here. Alexander ran with Nadia to the cellar, and my father, yes, he came at midnight.
And they always hid in the cellar, right?
Well, at first, yes, but then a person gets used to it and...
They weren't able to save Mrs. Nadia, the owner of this house. Her 70-year-old husband is in the hospital. His condition is stably serious. They had to amputate his leg. The house is beyond repair. The security situation in Semenivka is only getting worse, and I feel it more with every trip here. There are fewer and fewer people on the streets and more destroyed houses. Enemy drones just hover overhead. And to quickly take cover during shelling, these kinds of modular shelters have been set up all over the city. The air raid alert here is almost non-stop, sometimes lasting around the clock. That's why locals are always listening closely for any unusual sounds.
We've gotten really good at telling them apart. We already recognize the drops. We know the lightning and the wounds. And the Shaheds, by the way, the ones flying toward you, toward Kiev, very often we see them flying right over our heads.
We're also advised to pay attention to the sounds. After the first explosion is heard, we quickly go to the shelter.
Emergency service? Fire department?
At this point, employees of the local administrative service center are already at work.
We're hiding. There was just an impact.
Even under these conditions, Ms. Olena continues to receive visitors because people come from other villages in the community as well.
Checking for absence.
The visitor says that sometimes they are forced to travel to the community center, which is constantly under attack by Russian drones. But every trip to Semenivka is a challenge. Oh, I always feel anxious when I come here. It's scary. Yeah. Oh, that was a strike by a combat drone on the city council building and administrative offices. One of the affected sites caught fire.
Now, during the day, sometimes the fire truck can't even make it to the station, and the fires have become much larger. If before it was just firefighting gear, a Draeger tank, and that's it, now you also need a helmet, a bulletproof vest, and a first aid kit. You have to find out what's in the sky, the security situation.
Now, because of the drought, it's a fire hazardous period. And on top of that, the Russians are deliberately setting houses on fire. So, as Andriy Savitsky says, the rescuers have no time to catch their breath.
It feels like they're creating a buffer zone here so that nothing is left at all. They toss a lighter and the grass burns, the forest burns, the house burns, the barn burns, basically everything. And accordingly, well, the buildings are densely packed, so they start burning one after another.
While we were working in Semenivka, the Russian army carried out 7 targeted attacks on the town using strike drones. Critical infrastructure, private homes, and administrative buildings were targeted. The Russians have also changed their tactics. They launched jet-powered drones that reach speeds of over 300 kilometers per hour. These are harder to shoot down. Additionally, the enemy scatters leaflets designed to look like 100 hryvnia bills, urging people to give up the coordinates of Ukrainian armed forces positions in exchange for real money.
This is a classic example of an enemy information and psychological operation aimed at spreading panic among the population and persuading certain individuals to cooperate. We emphasize that sharing information about the location of Ukrainian troops is a serious criminal offense, but we are confident in the loyalty of our people and the unity of our society. If such leaflets are found, they should be handed over to the police or destroyed.
Enemy troops on the Chernihiv border are simply hunting people. Just a few days ago in this yard, an FPV drone killed a woman who was sorting potatoes.
Well, it happened during the day. Of course, they saw where, what and how. This is terror against the civilian population. I think it's so that people don't live here, so there is no development, so that we have no life here.
The north of Chernihiv region has always been a depressed area. It's far from the center. The population density is low, and the main jobs are in farming and forestry enterprises. Now the enemy is destroying everything the community relies on to survive. Even ordinary stores are under attack.
There were just 2 explosions. Now no one comes in anymore. Everyone just stays quietly at home and doesn't go out anywhere.
Miss Victoria only recently opened a nail salon, but because of a drone attack, today is not her day.
Whenever there are shellings here, my clients cancel their appointments. Well, there's nothing you can do. Even when you're running between shellings, you still want to look good. It's a way to distract yourself somehow.
The latest wave of drone activity over Semenivka hasn't triggered a mass migration of people, says Ms. Victoria.
Yes, it's crowded. We'll see how it goes from here.
But the only school in the community that was operating in person had to be closed. Children from several villages were brought there by school buses.
The children really wanted to study. But as we can see right now, so for now we've made this decision. We'll monitor the security situation. For now it's for a month and then we'll see.
Since the start of the full-scale war, the population of the Semenivka community has decreased by at least 1/3. There is no mandatory evacuation here, even though this is an area of active hostilities. For those who want to leave, the city council helps with transportation and finds housing in neighboring communities. So far, few people are willing to leave. Their homes, gardens, and farms keep them here. Valentina Dobrota, Mikhailo Putiata, TSN 1+1, United News Marathon.
Ukraine's defense forces are narrowing the salient that formed near Dobropilya as a result of the Russian troops' breakthrough. The villages of Volodymyrivka, Pankivka, Mayak and Novotoretske in the Pokrovsk direction are gradually coming under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces. Counter-offensive actions are ongoing, even though the enemy is trying to prevent them. The occupiers have increased the number of kamikaze drones attacking our logistics and assault groups, especially near Pokrovsk, where the front line is now moving most actively. In addition, the enemy has intensified pressure on the village of Kotlin south of Pokrovsk. According to the deep state map, some positions have been lost there. In the Lyman sector, the situation is becoming more complicated around the villages of Novoselivka and Drobyshev, which our soldiers liberated during the Kharkiv counter-offensive. Here the enemy is trying to approach Sloviansk, and another hotspot is the Siversk direction. There the occupiers are getting closer and closer to this city. The replenishment of the exchange fund, The soldiers of the 10th Edelweiss Brigade managed to film almost the entire process of a Russian being taken prisoner. Such a contactless method is not uncommon at the front. However, this case is unique because every movement of our soldiers and the enemies as well was recorded. Throughout the report, you will see a QR code on your screens. The unit's fighters are raising funds for a pickup truck. They will be grateful to all of us for donations toward this need. And now a spectacular and instructive story for the Russians from TSN correspondent Nelia Kowalska.
A field somewhere along the line of contact. At first it looks like a pile of garbage. Then the garbage starts to move.
Well, and these, I don't even know what to call them properly. Worms basically started to move.
It turned out there were actually two occupiers there. Alexander Karpovich, he's 25 years old. And just a year ago he lived in Volinohorsk and wrote software for drilling rigs. He has a family.
He has a very small child, just 7 months old, a loving wife, and also a dear mother.
He played football and did wrestling. Then he robbed a local official, and instead of serving time, he chose to sign a contract. He even came up with a motive.
To take revenge for his cousin's brother.
The interview with the Russian was recorded a few hours after this video, where he folded his hands in prayer.
He opened up alone and started showing like, oh, don't kill me. Yeah, like, please don't kill me. You know, with very expressive gestures and all. The pilots, as they say, kind of, you could definitely say, softened up a bit, basically.
Well, actually, we had already approached with the VOGs, which are the Voice of God announcements, and we were getting completely ready to drop them, yeah. We were fully prepared for their deployment, and then we saw those hands, and basically, for me, it always works on the level of exchange funds. That is, every prisoner I capture, for example, is a chance to bring one of our defenders back home.
This is the Ukrainian drone operator with the call sign Lana. It was she who came up with the idea to try to take the enemy prisoner.
We're corresponding with him. We dropped him some water with a message, and he writes messages back to us. This is, of course, pretty cool. I've never seen anything like this before.
That's how she and her comrade wrote messages on a bottle of water.
He says, you write it, and I say, I can't because I don't write in Russian. Like, I never learned that language. I can't write it.
My hands were already like this. I was already showing my hands like this. I surrender because they brought a bottle and it said, surrender, follow the drone, you will be helped.
The Russians receive the message, but apparently start arguing among themselves. Very little is known about the second occupier. 19 years old, call sign Frog. He didn't want to surrender.
Frog reported to the battalion commander that I was going to surrender, and they were already prepared. I hid under a bush and it hit 10 meters away.
The first note didn't help. I'm writing a second one.
Our pilots attach the second note to a grenade. The occupiers understand this hint better. Karpovich eventually does go after the drone. Frog stays in the field. What happened to Frog now? He's in the next world. How was he killed?
By airdropped munitions.
One chose a better path, and the other's ass started to smoke. When we do what we have to do, I also feel like I saved my infantry's lives, for example. But it's also a chance to bring one of ours back from captivity. And for me, that was really, really the main point.
Lana says she later watched the interview with the prisoner.
I didn't recognize him because on camera, well, obviously after someone has spent a certain amount of time in those conditions, and I thought he was about 50 years old. He was all filthy, and I thought he was already an older man, but here he is, a young guy, actually even older than me, and I was like...
He drank urine, made filters from clothes, and drank urine.
Karpovich is now preparing for the exchange, and even suspects what will happen afterward.
Well, I'll serve my time. How much do they give for that? They give from 10 to 15 years for treason. I'll serve my sentence and return to my daughter. My daughter will grow up. She'll understand.
He urges other fellow compatriots not to sign any contracts and has important advice for those who already have done so.
Surrender, lay down your arms, and leave the territory of Ukraine.
Nelia Kowalska, Mikhailo Putyata, TSN 1+1, United News Marathon.
Exercises involving a nuclear element on the border with the European Union. Russia and Belarus, without hiding it, are practicing an offensive on the Suwałki corridor, the shortest route to Kaliningrad through the lands of Poland and Lithuania. Meanwhile, a representative of the American president is flirting with Lukashenko in Minsk. Sanctions were lifted from the airline Belavia in exchange for the release and expulsion from the country of 52 political prisoners. However, some of them absolutely did not want to leave their homeland, and one of them did not leave at all. What did Trump write to Lukashenko, and how are Europeans reacting to his latest statements about Russian attacks? TSN's international correspondent Yana Slyserchuk will explain in detail.
On the night before Friday, barbed wire appeared at the checkpoints between Poland and Belarus. The border is completely closed for both entry and exit. A 3-kilometer zone along the border is off limits for flights, both in Poland and in neighboring Lithuania. This is how European states responded to the large-scale Russian-Belarusian military exercises with the telling name Zapad 2025. About 18,000 soldiers are taking part in them, including 5,500 Russians. They also plan to test the new missile system, Oreshnik. Mamad.
These maneuvers are specifically directed against Poland and the European Union. This is essentially an aggressive military scenario against our country.
The goal of the Russian-Belarusian exercises is no secret to anyone in Poland. This concerns a sparsely populated area on the border between Poland and Lithuania, the capture of which would give Russia a direct route to its Kaliningrad region.
One of the main targets of these exercises is the well-known Suwałki corridor. It is precisely this area that the simulated operations are aimed at least for now, they are simulated operations.
Meanwhile, the President of the United States, who continues to be questioned about what he thinks regarding the 24 Russian drones deliberately directed at NATO territory, responds, they simply made a mistake.
I heard about what happened. As you know, they were being shot down and they got a little out of control. But regardless, I condemn even the fact that they were close to that border. I don't like it. I'm not happy about it. I'm not happy about any of this.
This was not a mistake, writes Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski from the train taking him to Kiev. The day before, he noted that the drone incursion into Poland lasted 7 hours. 19 border violations were recorded. Drone debris fell more than 400 kilometers deep into Polish territory, so it's hard to call this a coincidence. But the day before, while the Poles were preparing to close the borders with Belarus, Minsk was hosting a special representative from the United States. And John Cole announced on camera that the American sanctions against the Belarusian airline Belavia had been lifted.
The conversation between our president from Air Force One and your president was very productive. All our talks with each other have been very productive. Now we are lifting the sanctions from Belavia. Right now, okay?
At that very moment, 52 political prisoners who had been held in Belarusian prisons were crossing the Lithuanian border. Among them were 16 foreign citizens. Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda was the first to thank Trump for the release of his 6 fellow citizens.
I want to note that the American efforts were indeed very effective and successful. In the end,
However, not all of the released Belarusians who are being welcomed at the American embassy in Lithuania agree with this, since they have now been deported from their own country. Journalist Larisa Shkiryakova, through tears, calls what happened to her a double punishment. First prison, now exile from my homeland.
I had 4 months left until my release. Forgive me if I say something wrong, but I would have liked to serve my sentence and stay at home.
And 69-year-old Nikolai Statkevich, in protest against the illegal deportation, simply refused to cross the Lithuanian border and spent several hours in the area between the two borders. Then the security forces took him back to Belarus. The fate of the opposition figure is currently unknown. The Belarusian dictator is quite skilled at trafficking people. Even before the start of Russia's full-scale war, he was terrorizing Poland and Lithuania with migrants whom he deliberately brought in from troubled countries in the Middle East and Africa for that very purpose. And once in Belarus, with the help of the security forces, he effectively created a corridor for them from Minsk, where planes would arrive, to the forest, to the European border, and would not let them leave from there. This pressure from the security forces behind them, combined with the unusual frosts, forced the destitute people to literally storm the border, while the Poles and Lithuanians on their side did everything possible to reinforce it. Now the Belarusian dictator has a new stage. For his compliance and the release of political prisoners, Trump is sending him cufflinks as a gift and wishing him a happy birthday.
Dear esteemed Mr. Lukashenko, my beloved wife Melania joins me wholeheartedly in sending her very best wishes to you and your family.
Belarus's permanent representative to the UN, Rybakov, who is translating the American letter for Lukashenko, is so nervous that his hands are shaking. For Lukashenko, who has been marginalized in recent years, these gestures of attention are much more beneficial than they are for Trump, who is making them. This potentially legitimizes Lukashenko on the world stage, just as much as Alaska does for Putin. But American sanctions are nowhere near as damaging to Minsk as European ones. That's why now Lukashenko has to hope that by releasing even more prisoners, he will eventually see Trump put pressure on European partners. He still has people to bargain with. There are still more than 1,000 people in prison for political reasons. Yanis Lesarchuk, TSN 1+1, Marathon United News.
At present, there is no evidence of a military strike group being formed on the border with Belarus that would threaten Ukraine. And the number of Russian troops who have arrived for joint exercises this time is significantly smaller. This was reported to TSN by Andriy Demchenko, spokesperson for the State Border Guard Service. According to him, border guards, together with intelligence services, are actively monitoring everything happening in the neighboring country during the joint exercises with Russia. Their active phase began today and will continue until the 16th of September. According to preliminary information, at this moment, Russia has not deployed a large number of forces and equipment. For example, in 2022, during similar exercises, the number of enemy personnel on the territory of Belarus reached up to 12,000. However, in a comment to TSN, Andriy Demchenko emphasized that various provocations or methods of informational influence by the enemy cannot be ruled out, since this direction has been threatening for Ukraine since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, when Belarus allowed the occupying troops to cross its border.
As of now, fortunately, there is no activity observed in the direction of our border, whether from various units of the Belarusian army or units of the Russian army. We cannot rule out either provocations or even informational influence aimed at escalating the situation in the hope that Ukraine will respond by further strengthening this direction, thereby weakening areas that are more important to us where active combat is taking place.
And a few hours ago, Donald Trump made another statement regarding the incidents when Russian drones crossed NATO borders. My patience with Putin is running out very quickly. The US president stated this earlier on the Fox and Friends program. Let us recall that he previously called the appearance of drones on Polish territory a likely mistake. He claimed that the drones went out of control when they were being shot down. Now, however, Trump has agreed that more pressure should be put on Russia, according to Politico, citing sources. But the US and the EU, it is said, differ in their methods. We'll talk more about this with TSN's own correspondent in the United States. Ola Koshelenko should be live with us in the studio right now. Olya, welcome. Here you are. Trump's patience keeps running out, but somehow never actually runs out. Can we now expect any real steps from the White House towards the Kremlin? And what is this conflict or misunderstanding, or these discussions with the EU that Politico is actually writing about?
Tasha, first of all, the context here is very important. Specifically, how did Trump say that his patience with Putin is running out? He actually repeated a phrase from a question asked by the host of Fox and Friends, where the president was on air this morning. The host asked him, "Mr. President, is your patience with Putin running out?" And the answer was, "It is running out, and very quickly." But in fact, just the day before, Trump called it a likely mistake that Russian drones entered NATO territory in Poland. At least 19 of them, by the way. But the President of the United States stated that he was informed it could have been a mistake that happened when the drones were being shot down. Today, Trump once again resorted to rhetoric claiming that both Zelensky and Putin are to blame for the war not ending. I suggest we listen to a fragment of his response about patience from the broadcast.
So, is your patience running out?
Yes, it seems to be running out, and it's running out quickly. But it takes two to tango. It's incredible. When Putin wanted to do it, Zelensky didn't. When Zelensky wanted to, Putin didn't. Now Zelensky wants to, and as for Putin, that's a question mark. But we will have to act very, very forcefully.
Also, in his important speech delivered today, President Donald Trump explicitly stated that imposing significant sanctions on both the banking and energy systems could potentially provide substantial assistance. And he has been repeating this for some time now. He says that the European Union also needs to take measures regarding the Russians, for example, that they are buying Russian oil products and their policy. Today, an article came out under the headline, "Trump finally wants to put pressure on Russia." But now comes the hardest part. The article states that this week there have been high-level contacts among senior officials of the EU and the United States. And a delegation from the EU even came here to Washington where they held negotiations. The point is that Trump wants the European Union to impose tariffs on India and China, which are buying Russian oil products. But the European Union has a different approach. They would still prefer direct sanctions against Russia. And this supposedly is where the conflict lies. And now both sides are actively trying to figure out precisely how to appropriately act in this complex and evolving situation. Let me continue with a quote from Politico.
This week, the US president told EU officials that he wants to impose a 100% tariff on Russian energy purchases by India and China, provided that Brussels follows suit. However, this is economically and politically impossible for the EU. Such a move would contradict the fundamental principles of the EU, especially after European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen reiterated her opposition to tariffs, insisting that tariffs are taxes on domestic consumers. Imposing tariffs on India, with whom Brussels is close to concluding an important trade agreement, and on China, on which its open economy heavily depends, would amount to a colossal act of self-harm.
And next week, the President of the United States will be in Europe. More specifically, he plans to visit the United Kingdom, and perhaps these issues will be discussed in more detail there. A celebration.
Olya, one more question. In America right now, I suspect this is one of the top topics, the murder of blogger and activist Charlie Kirk. And why has this crime become so much the focus of the American authorities? Even President Trump himself announced on the air today that a suspect had been detained.
Yes, Holiday. The suspect was indeed detained and was announced this morning. He is a 22-year-old local resident, Tyler Robinson. He was apprehended with the help of his own father, who recognized his son from photos distributed by the FBI, as well as a local priest. According to law enforcement, Robertson had recently, as they put it, taken an interest in politics. And on the rifle from which allegedly this single fatal shot was fired in Utah, it was engraved, "Hey, fascists, catch this." But all of this still needs to be clarified in detail. This blogger was a close friend of the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance. Together with his wife, Usha, they accompanied Kirk's body the day before on Air Force Two, the plane used by the Vice President of the United States. Usha Vance walked down the ramp hand in hand with Kirk's widow, Erica, while Vance himself symbolically joined in carrying the coffin from the plane. President Trump also considers Kirk to be a close friend of his. He was adored by Barron, Trump's son, and even, as Trump recounted on Fox and Friends, asked his father to arrange a meeting with his favorite blogger, after which he was absolutely thrilled with this person. And now Trump has promised to posthumously award Kirk the highest civilian honor, the Medal of Freedom, and also to attend the funeral. He also said on Fox and Friends that he hopes for the highest possible punishment for the killer. As is known in the United States, this is the death penalty. As a popular blogger, Kirk helped Trump secure victory in the last presidential election. Even Trump himself acknowledges this in the swing state of Arizona, where Kirk lived. Kirk consistently advocated for traditional Republican values, including the fundamental right to freely own firearms. And by the way, he spoke extremely negatively and quite vocally about U.S. financial assistance to Ukraine in particular. He would frequently repost President Zelensky's tweets, sincerely thanking the United States for their substantial help, and then quite pointedly write, "No, we are absolutely not helping you, and we do not support you in any way."
Thank you for helping to sort all this out, as always. Special correspondent for TSN in the United States, Olha Koshelenko. On the White House's reaction to the latest news from Europe and the murder of pro-Trump activist Charlie Kirk.